Gingerdead Man versus Evil Bong? Yep, that's a thing. These creepy crossovers will make your skin crawl or have you drop dead from laughter. The Necronomicon is the creation of influential early 20th century horror author H.P. Lovecraft. An ancient grimoire of horrible spells, the Necronomicon would later be used by countless other horror authors and filmmakers. A version of the book called the Necronomicon Ex Mortis plays a major role in the Evil Dead films.
It was never meant for the world of the living. The book awoke something dark in the woods.
Of course, when a group of young people decides to have some fun with it, they accidentally awaken an eldritch and malevolent force that terrorizes its victims across 3 movies. However, this version of the Necronomicon wasn't just confined to the Evil Dead series. It would also later appear in 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, implying that Jason Voorhees' resurrection may have gotten an assist from the book. It would also go on to make another appearance in 1994's Pumpkinhead 2, Bloodwings, in which it was seen in the house of the Old Witch. It makes perfect sense for the Necronomicon Ex Mortis to show up in movies that involve bridging the gap between the living and the dead, but that would also mean that the tome's owners also check it out from the same library. Considered one of the greatest slasher films ever, Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon is a mockumentary horror satire that takes place in a reality wherein the killers behind slasher flicks are real-life historical figures. Inspired by their kill counts, Nathan Basil's character, Leslie Vernon, is an aspiring serial killer who wishes to join the ranks of these infamous supernatural killers, but he must use ordinary means to do so, because he lacks these otherworldly abilities. Documenting Leslie's path to gory glory is journalist Taylor Gentry, played by Angela Goethals, and a couple of cameramen. They watch Leslie plan each murder with meticulous detail, and even meet his mentor, Scott Wilson's Eugene, a retired killer from the good old days, heavily implied to be the killer from 1974's Black Christmas. While the characters have different names and are played by different actors, Behind the Mask screenwriters David J. Steve confirmed the connection to Bloody Disgusting. I can confirm that Eugene has always been Billy in my mind. Even though he was a pioneer in the business of fear, he never achieved the fame or notoriety of his successors. The film also makes it quite clear that the killers who Leslie looks up to are Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise, Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and Chucky from the Child's Play series. And speaking of those guys, Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon wasn't the first film to imply that cinema's biggest baddies all existed in the same universe. Those seeds were planted years earlier. The ending of 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, sees the bladed hand of Freddy Krueger exploding out of the ground to presumably take Jason Voorhees' mask to hell. While that little tease would ultimately pay off in 2003's Freddy vs. Jason, the connections between those two villains were first established in 1998's Bride of Chucky. A scene features a police storage locker that just happens to contain Freddy's glove and Jason's hockey mask. But also seen in that police storage locker are the mask of Halloween's Michael Myers and Leatherface's chainsaw. This scene opens up countless possibilities of a wider shared universe that's far more sprawling than we might realize. For example, if the Necronomicon Ex Mortis from the Evil Dead franchise exists in the Friday the 13th franchise as we previously established, then that means it also exists in the Child's Play, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchises as well. Heck, maybe the chainsaw Ash uses to replace his hand was purchased from Stretch. Think about it. Jaws is a landmark film for several reasons. It was Steven Spielberg's first big success. It launched the concept of the summer blockbuster, and its theme, composed by the legendary John Williams, is one of the most iconic in cinema history. The movie was such a hit that it led to 3 sequels, none of which lived up to the acclaim of the original. Like many trend-setting movies, Jaws inspired a host of other animals attack innocent people movies. While most of these films were cheap imitation, the best of the lot could be considered Joe Dante's 1978 film, Piranha. It treated the concept with a sly sense of humor that still holds up well today. It was even loosely remade in 2010 as Piranha 3D by horror director Alexandra Aja. The through line that joins the world of Jaws to that of Piranha 3D is Academy Award-winning director Richard Dreyfuss, playing oceanographer Matt Hooper. While Dreyfuss is credited as Matt Boyd in Piranha 3D, the actor confirmed who he was really playing in an interview with Hollywood News. I played the older Matt Hooper, who escaped being eaten by the shark and is now eaten by a bunch of piranha fish. It's a nasty end for the character, but at least the actor's payment was a donation to his civics education project, the Dreyfuss Initiative. Ringu, also known as Ring, is a 1998 adaptation of the 1991 novel by Koji Suzuki. The film follows a reporter who is looking into an urban legend about a haunted videotape containing the vengeful spirit of a young girl named Sadako that kills anyone 7 days after viewing it. Several sequels followed, and an American remake in 2002 starring Naomi Watts. Another long-running Japanese horror film franchise is Ju-on. The third film in the series was Ju-on: The Grudge. Premiering in 2002, the film tells the story of a social worker who is plagued by 2 malevolent spirits. Kayako, and her son, Toshio, when she visits a home with a violent history. Like Ringu, Ju-on was followed by numerous sequels, spin-offs, and reboots, as well as a big-budget American remake in 2004, starring Sarah Michelle Gellar. But America isn't the only country that likes to take film franchises and crash them into one another. The primary ghosts from both of these Japanese horror franchises eventually met in 2016's Sadako vs. Kayako. The film follows two college students who, out of curiosity, unleash Sadako's evil spirit and must combat her with another evil spirit, that of Ju-on's Kayako. Responses to Sadako vs. Kayako from both audiences and critics were lukewarm at best, so don't expect these two ghosts to step into the ring again anytime soon. Ghostbusters is a cherished film that has delighted audiences since its release in 1984. The story of four enterprising men who decide to make hunting ghosts into a career is packed with laughs and scares in equal measure, bolstered by an unstoppable cast. The film was followed by a direct sequel in 1989, a reboot in 2016, and capped off with 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife. Casper the Friendly Ghost has appeared in countless cartoons from 1945 through his big-budget live-action debut in 1995's Casper. The film stars a daughter and father who move into a house which happens to be the home of Casper and his piggish uncles, the Ghostly Trio. Casper was popular enough to warrant two additional installments, 1997's Casper: A Spirited Beginning and 1998's Casper Meets Wendy. However, these two franchises have more in common than simply being lighthearted movies about ghosts, although Casper is darker than you may remember. Dan Aykroyd makes a cameo appearance in Casper as his Ghostbuster character Ray Stantz, during a sequence in which the heiress of the haunted house calls on several experts to rid it of its ghostly inhabitants.
Who are you gonna call? Someone else.
Released in 2018, Stree is a frightfully funny take on the Indian legend of Nali Ba, revolving around the ghost of a dead bride who wanders around rural areas in search of her husband. The ghost is reputed to kidnap the random men she encounters, especially those who are the primary breadwinners of their families. It's a pretty horrific myth, but in Stree, it's given a comedic take. Filmmaker Dinesh Vijan also produced its 2021 spin-off, Ruhi. In this installment, two inept criminals are hired to kidnap a young woman possessed by a demonic entity. Things get weird when one of them falls in love with the girl while the other falls in love with the demon. Also, the film Bidia, set to be released in November 2022, will be the third entry into Vijan's cinematic universe, spoofing traditional Indian werewolf legends. It may seem that the only feature these films have in common is that they're supernatural horror comedies overseen by Vijan. However, this series of film includes actors reprising the same roles, with several set to appear in 4 additional films which are scheduled to be released starting in 2023. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a horror classic that spawned a slew of gory sequels, prequels, spin-offs, reboots, and remakes. Its first sequel, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, was released in 1986 and largely veers away from the snuff film aesthetics of the original, instead going down a more darkly comedic path. The film focuses on Vanita Stretch Brock, a radio DJ who gets caught up in a plot to lure the previous film's killers out of hiding.
You got that last slaughter on tape, you play it on the radio. Maybe then the laws will stop trying to shut me up and start helping me.
Sharknado is a series about shivers of sharks that arrive in major metropolitan areas via tornadoes and eat people. It's a simple premise, and the sheer wackiness of it has found a consistent audience, leading to multiple sequels and the spin-off franchise, Lavalantula. There may not be a clear connection between chainsaws and sharks, which is why we need to look at Williams' character, Stretch. Stretch is most famous for her part in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and a brief appearance in Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. But Williams did reprise the character in 2016's Sharknado, The Fourth Awakens, this time as the owner of a chainsaw store. She made a great DJ, but after confronting Leatherface, it makes sense for her to switch careers to something a little more relevant to her experience. While Full Moon Features will never be recognized as a purveyor of high-quality cinema, they've nonetheless managed to make quite a few sci-fi, horror, and fantasy films that have attracted cult followings. The first of which, 1989's Puppet Master, spawned numerous sequels, prequels, and spin-offs. It didn't take long for Full Moon to develop a passion for killer doll movies. So, in 1991, they released Doll Man, a sci-fi flick about a 13-inch tall space cop. Full Moon continued with the small character theme in 1992, launching the horror comedy Demonic Toys and the sci-fi comedy Bad Channels, the latter of which is about 2 aliens who invade a radio station on Earth to lure in women to shrink them down to 11 inches tall. How did these cinematic masterpieces connect? These films first started to cross over with one another in 1993's Doll Man vs. Demonic Toys, which also featured a character from Bad Channels. 2004's Puppet Master vs. Demonic Toys saw the titular titans cause plenty of miniature mayhem. And Full Moon has yet to grow out of their pint-sized obsession. Their Gingerdead Man series collided with their Evil Bong series, resulting in Gingerdead Man vs. Evil Bong in 2013. The late great actor Dick Miller has made appearances in countless classic films, which include The Terminator and Gremlins. While he rarely played leading roles, his distinctive down-to-earth demeanor and gravelly voice were always welcome additions to any film he graced. However, did you know Dick Miller's character Walter Paisley was the linchpin of a whole cinematic universe that spans decades?
All that is comes through the eye of the artist. The rest are just blind fish swimming in a cave of aloneness.
Oh, you must be an artist.
The debut of Miller's Walter was in the 1959 horror comedy, A Bucket of Blood. He's a busboy at a pretentious beatnik cafe who attracts acclaim for his statues. However, his statues are actually the corpses of people he's murdered and covered in clay. While Walter commits suicide at the end of the film, Miller later reprised the character in Joe Dante's werewolf satire, The Howling, this time as the owner of an occult bookstore. Dante brought the character back again for his segment in Twilight Zone, the movie, in which Walter is the owner of a diner, whose attempts to flirt with a customer are thwarted by a call from his wife.
Hey, Walter, it's your wife.
Your wife.
Thanks.
Miller's Walter appeared as a janitor in 1986's Chopping Mall, which follows a group of teenagers who spend the night in a shopping mall with a trio of high-tech security robots on a rampage. Poor Walter gets electrocuted by one of the killer bots, but he's died before and gotten over it. He would go on to appear as Walter in other films like Night of the Creeps and Hanukkah.